had to take on various odd jobs to make ends meet. She single-handedly had to cover rent and George's education and put food on the table, which must have been horrible for her to handle alone. George even recounted once a particularly distressing memory where his mother had resorted to desperate measures for money, starting to have intimacy with men in their neighborhood to earn some extra cash. Unfortunately, this led to a dangerous situation when she was caught by some of these men's wives. They knocked sense into her in front of George and threatened her with even worse consequences if she ever repeated her actions and slept with their husbands. George vividly remembers the humiliation from that incident, and it's something that has deeply affected him. This is why he has worked so hard all his life to provide for his mother. Although I don't blame his mother, I have always felt bad for my fiancé. He had to grow up too soon and did not even get to enjoy his childhood properly. Hence, I've always made it a priority to give George experiences and gifts that he missed out on before. Whether it's asking him to the opera or Disneyland or surprising him with expensive Star Wars collectibles and an Xbox, things he's always wanted, I've spared no expense to fulfill his dreams. I'm fortunate to afford these luxuries, not only because of my well-paid job but also because I come from a comfortable background with a home in my name and no rent to worry about. My parents are wealthy and have given me and my younger brother everything that we have ever wanted. George is such a wonderful man, so I've never hesitated to spend my money on him. Seeing him happy and experiencing things he never had the chance to do before is incredibly rewarding. When we go on vacations, I cover all the expenses because I know he wouldn't be able to afford the luxurious 5-star resorts that I prefer. On our birthdays, I've never pressured him to buy me expensive gifts. I cherish meaningful gestures like hand-drawn cards or heartfelt letters. I've always had open conversations with George about my spending on him, making sure he's comfortable with it. Thankfully, he has never raised any concerns and understands where I'm coming from. Our relationship is built on mutual respect and understanding, and it brings me joy to see him happy and content with me. One of my fondest memories with him was our trip to the mountains 2 years ago. We hiked to the top of a peak and watched the sunset together, feeling like we were on top of the world. In those quiet moments, surrounded by nature and his comforting presence, I knew I had found someone truly special. Just as I was lost in the tranquility of the moment, George surprised me in the most heartwarming way possible. He knelt down before me and pulled out a small velvet box. My heart skipped a beat as I realized what was happening. I hadn't expected a proposal then and there, but the love and sincerity in his eyes were unmistakable. Inside the box was a ring that sparkled in the fading light, a ring he had been quietly saving up for to mark this very moment. Tears of joy welled up in my eyes as I said yes without hesitation, feeling an overwhelming sense of gratitude and love. In that breathtaking setting under the canopy of the evening sky, I knew in my heart that I had found not just a partner but my soulmate. That evening, as we descended the mountain together hand in hand, I couldn't stop smiling. It is a memory etched into my heart forever. When we started planning our future together, I felt incredibly lucky to have George by my side. He wasn't just my fiancé, he was my best friend and my confidant. My parents love him as much as I do. However, the only person who seems to have a problem with us is his mother. Dealing with George's mother has been a challenge for me. Despite meeting her several times, she has never really warmed up to me. It's not that I sense jealousy or resentment, which might be more typical in future mothers-in-law. Instead, she seems to regard me with pity, almost as if she finds me distasteful. I tried to initiate conversations with her about this, hoping to understand her perspective or address any concerns she might have, but she remains silent and ignores me until I eventually walk away. It's perplexing and hurtful because I genuinely want to build a positive relationship with her for George's sake. Navigating this dynamic has been tough, especially when I see how much George values family. I've learned to approach interactions with her cautiously, hoping that with time and effort we can bridge whatever divide seems to exist between us. George's mother has a peculiar reaction whenever he shows affection towards me in her presence. She visibly recoils in disgust. It's an uncomfortable situation for both of us, so we've learned not to display any sign of affection when she's around. It's a bit odd, but we respect her boundaries nonetheless. I remember the first time George dragged me to have Christmas dinner with his mother. It was just the three of us, and she hardly spoke to me throughout the evening, which made for a rather awkward experience. As we sat at the table, she and George chewed their food loudly while I found myself trying to make small talk to fill the silence. Despite my efforts, the atmosphere remained tense and awkward. I did not enjoy the evening at all. Since my family went all out to celebrate the holidays, we gathered with extended family, exchanged gifts, and enjoyed festive meals together, a tradition I've always cherished from my childhood. The next year, I remember discussing with George the idea of him joining me for our Christmas celebration with my family instead of going to his mother's, but he firmly told me that he was not going to ditch his mother. I respected his decision and didn't push the matter further. It was important to him, and I understood his desire to be with his mother during the holidays. To find a balance that worked for both of us, we agreed on a compromise. We would spend the Christmas holidays separately with our respective families. This way, George could enjoy the day with his mother, and I could celebrate it with my family. This solution has worked out and made both of us happy over the years. However, last year, my grandparents passed away, and out of respect, my family decided not to hold our usual Christmas celebration that year. This is why I suggested to George that he and I spend Christmas evening with his mother. When I mentioned this to him, instead of understanding, he suddenly became defensive. Update. I was about to marry my fiancé of 2 years until I discovered a video from his bachelor's party telling everyone the real reason why he wanted to marry me, so I decided to walk down the aisle in casual clothes and told everyone his secret. He felt I should have informed him earlier and expressed concerns about his mother possibly feeling uncomfortable with me there. I was confused by his reaction, especially since I had never disrespected his mother, and it was still 5 days until Christmas, so he had plenty of time to inform her. It wasn't even like there was any grand feast to be planned, since she always just cooked spaghetti and meatballs as this was George's favorite meal. I reassured him that if he was worried about his mother cooking for me, then I could handle my meal myself and even suggested that we could pick something up so his mother wouldn't have to cook it all, allowing her to take a break. However, George insisted that his mother wouldn't approve and told me firmly that we should continue to keep our celebrations separate. I was hurt by his reaction, but I always respected his decision and didn't press the issue further. On Christmas Day, while George got ready to spend the day with his mother, I stayed home in my pajamas, watching movies in bed. I made video calls to my family and spent the day by myself. George returned home unusually late that night, but at the time, I didn't think much of it. Imagine my surprise when, shortly after the holidays, an old school friend who still follows me on social media reached out to me and asked if George and I had broken up. I was completely taken aback by her question and couldn't understand why she would even think that. Curious, I asked her if something had happened, which is when she sent me a screenshot of a photo where a woman was standing next to George. Both of them were standing close and smiling broadly in the picture. My friend went on to tell me that she knew this woman and followed her on social media, hence had immediately recognized my fiancé in her pictures. They looked too cozy together, so she wanted to ask me directly if I had perhaps broken up with George. As I zoomed in on the picture, trying to make sense of it, I noticed the familiar countertop behind them. It was unmistakably the same one in George's mother's kitchen. It hit me then that this photo must have been taken at his mother Caroline's place. My heart sank a little as I continued to scrutinize the image, noticing George in the shirt and trousers he wore during our Christmas dinner. The realization washed over me slowly. George had spent Christmas Day with his mother as usual, but what left me feeling uneasy was the realization that he hadn't mentioned meeting this mystery woman when he had chosen to spend the day apart from me, leaving me alone on Christmas. Also, it wasn't just about the photo, it was about the fact that he had never, ever brought up this woman in our entire relationship, yet seemed really friendly with her from the photo. I asked my friend to send me the profile of this mystery woman, and she kindly obliged. I thanked my friend for her help and sat down to investigate this woman's profile. Luckily, her profile was open, so it didn't take long for me to find the picture of George and her together. She hadn't tagged him, but I noticed that George had left a comment, a red rose emoji, under the post, indicating that he had seen the picture. I immediately took a screenshot, unable to believe what I was seeing. I felt numb, trying to recall if George had ever mentioned her to me, but it was clear that he hadn't. As far as I knew, George had no friends besides his mother, and he rarely mentioned any other acquaintances other than his coworkers. While I didn't mind if he had friends of the opposite gender, the fact that he hadn't told me about her struck me as odd. I decided to call my brother, knowing he could offer a perspective from a man's point of view. I didn't want to escalate things and cause a confrontation with my fiancé. Instead, I hoped my brother could help calm me down and make sense of the situation. To my surprise, my brother found the entire situation just as strange as I did. He advised me to confront George about it directly and stand firm if he tried to give any excuses. My brother emphasized that there was no valid reason for George to hide a friendship from me unless there was something suspicious happening. His words made me realize the seriousness of the situation, and I knew I had to address it with George to understand the truth. That evening, when George returned home, I served him dinner and waited for him to finish, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy despite the turmoil inside me. He attempted to act cheerful, but it was clear he sensed something was amiss. Later, as we settled on the couch, I knew I couldn't delay the conversation any longer. I told him we needed to talk. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone, showing him the picture that the woman had uploaded. I asked him who this woman was and why he had never mentioned her to me. George's expression changed instantly. His eyes widened in shock, and his face drained of color. He stammered, asking how I knew about the picture, but I pressed him, demanding to know who she was and why he hadn't mentioned her to me before. George cleared his throat nervously and muttered that she was one of his childhood friends. My eyebrows furrowed in confusion as I pointed out that he had never once mentioned her during all the years we had been together. The silence that followed was thick with tension, leaving me waiting anxiously for his response. He then asked me if his mother had talked to me earlier, but I shook my head, puzzled by his question. I demanded to know what he was talking about. George let out a sigh and admitted that the woman in the picture was someone from his past, a childhood friend he had known a long time ago while growing up. He explained that his mother had invited her to Christmas dinner without his prior knowledge, and he was just as surprised as I was to see her there. George tried to reassure me, saying he didn't think it was necessary to mention her to me because she was simply a friend. As he claimed this, I couldn't help but notice his guilt and nervousness, which only fueled my confusion. When I questioned him about why he appeared so uneasy, he became defensive, insisting that he disliked such confrontations and that I should trust him enough not to ask such stupid and uncomfortable questions. I then asked him why he was standing so close to her with his arms around her waist. He shook his head and angrily got up from the couch, telling me that I was starting to sound childish and immature since it was just a photo his mother wanted them to take. He walked off without waiting for me to respond. I sat there, trying to process what had just happened, feeling a mix of confusion and disappointment. Despite his attempts to downplay the situation, I couldn't shake off the feeling that there was more to the story. His reaction left me feeling uncertain and uneasy, unsure of whether I could trust his explanation entirely. However, the next day, George showed me his social media and revealed that he had blocked the woman in the picture. He assured me that he had taken this step so I could feel at ease and know that he was only mine. Despite my mixed feelings about his reaction the previous day, I managed a faint smile, appreciating his effort to distance himself from the woman and reassure me of his commitment. I did try to call his mother and talk to her about this matter, but she refused to pick up my call, so I just let it be. I didn't bring up this incident ever again. This year, George and I had already made plans for our wedding, including booking the venue and caterer well in advance. My parents graciously covered the entire expenses without any questions. We had decided on separate bachelorette and bachelor parties for the weekend. I had arranged for my brother to accompany George to his bachelor party, knowing that George didn't have many friends to invite apart from some coworkers. While my friends and I were preparing for a relaxing and rejuvenating 3-day spa trip, George and his friends were gearing up for their own celebrations separately. It was an exciting time as we each wanted to enjoy our last moments of singlehood before the big day. During the bachelorette party night, my brother kept me updated with messages about George's spending, mentioning how he was using my card on extravagant things like getting drunk and tipping dancers generously. Since I wanted George to have a good time with his friends, I offered him one of my cards, and my brother was aware of this. Despite my brother's concerns, I reassured him to relax and enjoy himself. I don't remember much from the night as I and my girlfriends also got drunk and went for a nighttime swim, which left us tired and ready for bed. I had put my phone on silence, so I missed my brother's calls during the night. The next morning, I woke up to several notifications. Final update. I was about to marry my fiancé of 2 years until I discovered a video from his bachelor's party telling everyone the real reason why he wanted to marry me, so I decided to walk down the aisle in casual clothes and told everyone his secret. When I groggily opened my eyes the next morning, I saw the barrage of messages my brother had sent me overnight. There were multiple photos and videos, so I sat up in bed, curiosity piqued. At first, the videos showed George receiving dances from dancers. It wasn't great, but I figured it was part of the wild night out. However, as I continued watching, my heart sank. George was getting touchy with some of the dancers, clearly drunk and making gestures. It was unsettling, but I tried to rationalize that it might be a result of too much alcohol. Then I came across the last video my brother had sent. It seemed to be recorded secretly from outside a room. In it, George, clearly drunk, was talking to one of his co-workers who was going to be the best man at our wedding. My fiancé was lamenting about how much he missed having wild intimacy and how seeing the dancers made him miss his old times. His best man laughed as George continued, saying that if it weren't for the money, he would have left me a long time ago because I'm plain-looking and vanilla. My breath caught as the video ended. I felt a mixture of shock, hurt, and betrayal. My brother had sent several messages after that, asking me if I had seen the video and expressing his fury, saying he wanted to end George for saying such horrible things behind my back. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to process the overwhelming emotions crashing over me. I called my brother, needing more information about the video and where it was filmed. He explained that during the night, he had been out on the hotel balcony smoking when George, his best man, and a few dancers came into the hotel room, clearly drunk. My brother didn't want to disturb them, so he stayed outside, continuing to smoke. As the night progressed, the dancers gave George and his best man dances and performed other acts. After a while, the dancers left to go to another room. My brother then overheard George talking about me, so he decided to film it. He shared how this morning he had found George passed out in bed with a dancer, both of them without clothes. He told me that he was so pissed that he had immediately left since he did not want to bash my fiancé's head into a wall and wanted to talk to me first about everything. Hearing this, a wave of nausea washed over me. I felt utterly betrayed and heartbroken. My brother's voice was filled with anger and concern as well. He assured me that he would support me in whatever I decided to do next. The reality of the situation was devastating, and I struggled to comprehend how everything had spiraled out of control so quickly. Long story short, I confronted George after we both returned home. I told him about the video, expecting some form of remorse or apology. Instead, George was furious that my brother had recorded him without his permission. He felt violated, which was laughable given the disgusting things he had said about me to his best man. I asked him directly if those were his true feelings about us. He dismissed it, saying he was just tipsy and talking with his guy friends. He insisted my brother had no right to tattle to me, and when I asked him why he had slept with a dancer, George went on to explain that it was a bachelor party and that he was allowed to sleep with other women for that one night at least. I was taken aback, telling him that we never discussed this and he had no right to do such things. George scoffed and told me that this was the tradition of bachelor parties and I should have explicitly told him about my rules before he went away. His cavalier attitude and blatant disregard for my feelings left me speechless. I realized that the man standing in front of me, who I thought I knew so well, was starting to feel like a stranger in many ways. I was so pissed that I started to pack my bag, telling George that I needed some time to think over everything. Seeing me pack, he suddenly realized the gravity of the situation and began to panic. He begged me to keep a level head, insisting that he had never done anything like this before and had just gotten carried away this one weekend. He tried to justify his actions, saying that we couldn't just throw our years of a relationship down the drain over one mistake. He assured me that he still wanted to marry me no matter what since I was the only one he loved. However, his pleas and justifications did nothing to calm me down. Currently, I am at my parents' place, and while I still haven't called off my wedding, I am conflicted about what to do. George continues to apologize to me every day. I feel torn between the love I have for him and the betrayal I can't ignore. My parents and brother have assured me that the decision is completely up to me, though I am sure my brother will be very disappointed if I go through with the wedding. Update 1. Thank you to everyone for opening up my eyes. I feel like a fool for not seeing the truth about my fiancé sooner. It's true that I loved him so much that I was even willing to turn a blind eye to his continuous disrespect for our relationship. I honestly don't know if he actually had anything to do with the woman in the picture from last year, as I never found any further evidence. I realized there may have been other women over the years that I was probably unaware of, but at this stage, I'm not concerned about that anymore. The evidence I have from his bachelor party alone is more than sufficient reason for me to leave him. Also, George's mother has tried to get in touch with me, which is very odd since she never even talked to me. She has sent me multiple voicemails and text messages saying I'm putting her son in distress for something very trivial and that men do worse things in her relationship, so her son sleeping with a dancer should not be considered a deal breaker. Update 2. Since the wedding was already paid for and even with cancellation, my parents were not going to get any refunds back. I decided to take this opportunity to publicly call out my fiancé in front of all our guests and end things with him so he and his mother cannot twist the narrative later. In the days leading up to the wedding, George kept texting me about how much he loved me and wanted to marry me, but I felt absolutely nothing for him anymore. On the day of my wedding, I decided to reach the venue with my parents and brother by my side, who already knew of my decision to break things off with my fiancé. I walked down the aisle on what was supposed to be our wedding day, not in a beautiful white gown, but in my casual clothes. At first, our guests seemed taken aback. The whispers and gasps of the crowd grew louder as I made my way to the front. George stood there dressed in his tuxedo, looking confused and increasingly anxious as he saw my determined expression. He asked me why I wasn't wearing my dress, but I ignored him. I reached the front as the room fell silent and everyone held their breath in anticipation. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I slammed the eviction papers into his hands. You have cheated on me, disrespected me, and used me for my money all these years. I thought you were just some special guy when in reality you were just a broke man-child. The audacity you had to sleep with a dancer and call it a one-time mistake makes me believe you must have done these things a lot throughout our relationship. I feel utter disgust looking at you. Your mother clearly did not raise you well, and you are not fit to be part of my family. You have a week to move out of my house, otherwise my brother and my dad will be happy to escort you out to the street, I said, my voice echoing through the room. I am done with you and your lies. George's face went pale and his eyes wide with shock. The murmur of the crowd turned into an audible gasp. I felt a mix of empowerment and sadness, but I knew this was the right thing to do. My dad then stepped forward and announced, everyone from our side of the family is welcome to join us at the reception where we will be celebrating my daughter's breakup from this cheating man. As for people from George's guest list, I must ask you to leave immediately. George's mother looked furious and tried to loudly say how disrespectful I was being towards her son and that George had been apologizing to me all along, but I was too big-headed to forgive him. My mother, infuriated by her words, shot back, no self-respecting man would have cheated on their fiancé. If you can't see how vile your son is, then you both deserve each other. George and his mother tried to quickly gather their things, feeling utterly humiliated, and left along with one or two of their co-workers who had come to attend. Once they were gone, the atmosphere shifted. We spent the rest of the day dancing and enjoying the feast I had envisioned for my wedding. My friends and family made sure I knew I wasn't alone. My brother pulled me aside and told me how proud he was of me for standing up for myself. His words made me feel sentimental because, if you have a sibling, you know that brothers hardly ever give you any compliments. Honestly, I think humiliating George in front of everyone gave me back some sense of power that I had lost during our relationship. I feel like I have finally taken control of my life.